The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
Breaking down this big matchup, it's going to be a fun one.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
These two teams are bound for the playoffs. The Steelers can't clinch anything this week. The Chiefs can't. They can clinch the 1 seed with a single win more. The Steelers, if they win this game, they set themselves up to potentially clinch the AFC North with a win against the Bengals at home next week. However, both sides have been worried about injuries. The Steelers got some good news on their injury report after several players missing their loss against the Ravens. George Pickens, full participant in practice. Deshaun Elliott, key safety, full participant. Dante Jackson, Larry Ogunjobi, also full participants. Joey Porter Jr., he looks like he's going to miss this game, but those are all key additions. Meanwhile, Kansas City's not being so lucky. What's going on over there with their injury report?
Chris Jones is probably out this week. Looks like DJ Humphries is probably out this week as well. And we'll see on Jawan Taylor. He is limited in practice. He's been limited the last couple of weeks and played. The injury reports, and we're recording this a little early just to let you know, the injury report is not out for Tuesday yet. So it's possible he will practice and he will play. But I would kind of guess he's going to play based on the way it's gone the last couple of weeks. But Chris Jones and DJ Humphries are going to be big misses if both of those guys aren't able to go. And from everything I've heard, Chris Jones is probably out until maybe the playoffs. But so that could be something. To me, I get it. I mean, you're in a situation where you're fighting for the number 1 seed. Don't get me wrong, you want him out there, but a worse injury and then he misses the entire playoffs. So to me, you hold him out, you try to win without him, and this is what you got to deal with.
And this is part of what happens when the NFL is trying to smash together all these short-term games. Yep. Both teams had short weeks last week. And I want to say this before, because whenever we say stuff on these channels, people are like, oh, you're being biased and one-sided. When I say this, I'm saying this for all parties involved. I think Wednesday games stink. I get that it's about revenue. I get that it's about money. I get the Christmas Day and the allure of that. But Chris, I look at this and I'm thinking, this is a pure cash grab that does not care about the health of these players. And now you got Chris Jones, one of the best interior pass rushers in the NFL, not playing in a matchup between 2 playoff opponents on Christmas Day. Like this is exactly why you didn't want to do this. You wanted everyone to be as healthy as they could be. And now you're going to have a key player miss because you're doing this. They had a short week last week, a short this week. Chris Jones had some very animated words about that situation. Cam Hayward also had his fair share of things to say.
Yeah, Chris Jones talked and said, he needs to talk to the NFLPA. Kansas City, and part of the reason the Chiefs are so upset, part of the reason Chris Jones is so upset, 3 games in 11 days. That's a ton of football. That's one thing. But the Chiefs had their bye week in week 6. They haven't had any time off since week 6. They've quite literally played, as soon as they play on Wednesday on Christmas, they will have played every single day of the week except for Tuesdays. They played on Wednesdays. They will have played on Wednesdays. They played on Thursdays. They played Black Friday. They played last Saturday. And obviously they play on Sunday, and they played a Monday night game. So they played every single day of the week except for Tuesday.
That's insane.
And that's just insane. So that's why the players are upset because they don't want to be playing on short notice. Chris Jones probably misses this game regardless just because of when the injury happened, and that stinks. But for Kansas City, the other part of it that you have to look at is they're playing 3 playoff teams in 11 days.
Yeah.
Or 2 playoff teams in 11 days, and then the Denver Broncos after that, because they started with the Browns. Obviously, they're not a playoff team, but then they go up against the Texans, who will be in the playoffs. Steelers are going to be in the playoffs, and their last game is against the Broncos. All 3 playoff teams in the last 3 weeks of football, 2 of those games are within, 4 days of each other?
Yep. Yeah, it's the same thing for the Steelers because they do have 3 playoff teams and 3 pretty good ones. They played the Eagles 2 weeks ago they played the Ravens just on Saturday, and now they get the Chiefs. And that's why a lot of people were saying at the beginning of the season, Steelers can't win the division, or they can't even make the playoffs. They got too tough of a schedule late down the stretch. Now they've built up, I think, enough. They built themselves up enough, goodwill with the wins they got earlier in the season. So they've lost the last two, and that's allowed them to kind of already clinch the playoffs. But you're looking into this. Cam Hayward also said, we were in the locker room and I was talking to him, and I asked him, like, hey, he was talking about the NFLPA, and he's like, look, we all signed up to make money. We all signed up to play the game. You know what it is. It's the same for both sides. Both teams are having the same problem. He's like, and I asked him, so like, is part of a solution from the NFLPA to add extra bye weeks maybe into a season to get things? And he was like, you know what? A better idea would be to actually have a bye week before a Wednesday game. He's like, we all just got done playing on Saturday. And I think it's just common sense. Like, you want your players to be healthy. Creating these short weeks, one, it puts them at risk for more injuries. And then like let's say Patrick Mahomes, because you're talking about they're going to be the Chiefs convincing a key tackle. What if this is the week where just the wrong but missed block happens and Patrick Mahomes gets hurt?
Yeah.
Playing the playoffs, and then the NFL is going to be like, oh man, that's going to be terrible. We're missing. Yes, it is going to be terrible, which is why you should defer more to protecting your players and doing that. And I just think it puts both sides at a disadvantage. I think the Steelers might get more of an advantage this week because they were able to rest a lot of guys who had just gotten hurt last week against the Ravens, and now they're coming back this week. They're still going to be missing probably Joey Porter Jr., who's their number one corner, and he's helped them in some key matchups. He's had some bad games here and there too, but Chris Jones, that's a superstar player. That's like if the Steelers are missing Cam Hayward, and that would be a disaster for them. So I think it's just it goes back to the NFL's greed kind of stepping in and maybe not doing the best, thinking the best of their players in this situation.
Well, and let's not forget, Patrick Mahomes got injured against the Browns. There was a chance that he was not even going to play against the Texans. Based on what you saw, obviously he was walking afterwards. It came out that it was a high ankle sprain. A lot of people, when they get high ankle sprains, they're not playing for a couple of weeks. Yep. He is built differently, and I don't understand it, but he is built differently. He's able to make it through it, and he's able to go. But we're going to talk about this here in a little bit when we start talking about the matchups later on in the show. But the thing that concerns me is you talk about a guy like TJ Watt, who's coming back from an ankle injury, and obviously he was able to play against the Ravens. But you talk about the Chiefs tackles missing this game, or potentially missing this game. DJ Humphrey's not playing, so you have Joe Thuney as your left tackle. If Jawan Taylor doesn't play, that means Wanya Morris is your right tackle, and he's going to be going up against TJ Watt. That is not something that I really want to see Patrick Mahomes in a situation where he's got Wanya Morris going up against TJ Watt every single down and having to try to get the number one seed with TJ Watt on the other side of Wanya Morris.
I think that's the whole thing here. Wanya Morris having to go up against the Steelers for the Chiefs. I know Steelers fans know exactly what I'm about to say here about where TJ Watt lines up. The Steelers always put TJ Watt practically on the right tackle. It's just the side he's most comfortable with. Him and Alex Highsmith have developed a chemistry over the past several seasons, and now they feel this comfort when they're able to go to it. But the Steelers have, at very rare times this season, move TJ Watt around. Sometimes he lines up as like an off-ball linebacker, or lines up over the middle, or sometimes lines up over the left tackle. And they've moved him around in rare spots, but only momentarily. Like, for example, when they played the New York Giants in the middle of the season, they moved him to the right side, or to the left tackle, for 4 plays. Those 4 plays against the Giants, you'd have to go back to 2021 to total how many times he had lined up over the left tackle before that game. If you were to do that. So TJ Watt's going to line up on the right tackle probably in this game, unless the Steelers move around. If they do, it's an exclusive move they're doing to just confuse the Chiefs and to take advantage of a matchup there. But they're also very confident in Alex Highsmith. They're very confident in Nick Herbig, their second-year player out of Wisconsin, who's made some really big plays off the edge. They also like Preston Smith, who they acquired in a trade right before the trade deadline. So they have 4 guys they like to rotate on the edge, and I do think that's going to play a big factor here. Is which defensive front that's been very good. Both teams have had very good defensive fronts this season. Which defensive front causes more havoc for the opposing offensive line, and which quarterback handles it better? Patrick Mahomes looked like he had no problem moving last week with that 15-yard touchdown run we saw. But still, you want to protect your superstar, just like the Steelers want to protect Russell Wilson.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
The Baltimore Ravens and Houston Texans face off in a major Christmas showdown.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
John, let's move into some keys to victory for both of these teams here. I think that there are ways that both teams could pull this one out, ways that they can lose this game. I'll start on the Ravens side of things as they are traveling to Houston. This is actually, for those that don't know, the second straight year Baltimore is traveling. They are playing away on Christmas Day. The Ravens did it last year against San Francisco. That game went pretty well for them, and Lamar Jackson wrapped up the MVP there. Lamar has a chance to wrap up the MVP in Houston against the Texans this time around. But number one, I think Baltimore has to continue their strong play from Pittsburgh, particularly in the penalty department. The Ravens going into their game against Pittsburgh, John, they were ranked last in nearly every statistical major penalty category there was. Like every single one. Penalties against, you had yards, net penalties. It was bad. The Ravens against Pittsburgh, just 2 penalties for 10 yards. That is the type of football you need to play. Mistake-free, or at least as close to it as you can get football, because there have been too many times this season where the Ravens will have a nice 8-yard run from Derrick Henry on first down. And then all of a sudden, there's Holden, Ronnie Stanley, 10 yards, a 2nd and 2 turns into a 1st and 20, and that just derails drives. So getting out of your own way if you're the Ravens. Don't let Houston make this game all sloppy and try to make it their way. Get ahead and do your thing while also making sure that you're not getting in your own way while doing that. Second part of this, I would definitely say put pressure on CJ Stroud, and for the Texans offensive line, which has dealt with injuries, is still dealing with injuries and hasn't performed up to most expectations this season. Guys like Travis Jones, Nnamdi Madubuike, Odafe Owe. I think if those guys can put pressure on CJ Stroud, turn up that internal clock, any quarterback, I don't care how good you are, any quarterback that has that clock sped up, certainly CJ can make plays when that happens. I'm not saying he can't, but you don't want CJ just sitting back there in the pocket for 4 or 5 seconds, going through his reads and not feeling any heat. You got to turn up the pressure on CJ. I'd expect Baltimore to maybe use Roquan Smith up at the line. Maybe they'll flirt with Kyle Hamilton up there. They like using Brandon Stevens, Nate Wiggins on those corner blitzes. I think that's a big way for Baltimore to win this game. And finally, my third key to victory for Baltimore is I just think getting the tight ends involved. And Mark Andrews has been awesome. Isaiah Likely has been awesome. The Texans got back Christian Harris, who's a heck of a linebacker, absolute stud of a player. But I feel like the Texans are going to miss Jalen Petrie in this game. This is a guy that you would be, okay, this is your tight end stopper. Go out there, versatile player, can play all over the field. I feel like they're going to miss him. And I feel like for the tight ends, we know about Zay Flowers as a wideout. We know about Rashad Bateman as a wideout as well. And actually, for Baltimore's injury situation, you still have a couple of guys who you would think maybe would have been practicing by now, but they're actually not. Now, again, this is a short week. I think both teams are being pretty conservative with their guys and not pushing anybody too far. But Baltimore's Monday injury report, Nelson Aguilar, Jalen Armour-Davis, Daniel Falele, Zay Flowers, Justice Hill, and Trey White all did not practice. So you essentially have one more practice day today to maybe get that status up. Who knows? But out of these guys, the ones that I don't expect to play, I don't think Nelson Aguilar or Justice Hill will clear in time to play. Justice Hill's concussion was nasty on Saturday. I'm not sure about Zay Flowers. I'm not sure about Trey White. I would probably say both those guys play. But to me, I feel like if the Ravens can get Mark Andrews involved, Isaiah Likely involved, I feel like that's a way that the Ravens can exploit this Houston defense and use the short passing game too. You got Will Anderson, you got Danielle Hunter, you got a good defensive line. If they're getting pressure on you, the best way to combat, even if the Texans want to blitz Lamar, It's about getting the ball out quickly. So I feel like that's, for me, keys to victory for Baltimore. What about you, John? What are some keys to victory for the Texans?
I'm actually going to steal one of yours. And we know Tank Dell is down, struggling offense. Houston extended Dalton Schultz in the offseason. He's been a disappointment so far to this part of the season. Not nearly the season he had last year, but, we talk about the wide receiver room and that depth chart in that area of the team being banged up. The fact is, Dalton Schultz, your $11 million a year man, has to be able to produce for this offense. There's no way around it. CJ needs him. It's been frustrating a lot this year with Dalton Schultz, and I'm going to be fair to him. You didn't pay him $11 million to block as much as he has. But Dalton has routinely on tape shown a lackadaisical effort on the field. And it's been frustrating to watch. So he needs to get involved. Nobody talks about Brevin Jordan and his injury and how much that has impacted this offense in a lot of different ways. When you lose a Swiss Army knife that can do different things, it hurts an offense. And Dalton Schultz, he needs to step up. Irv Smith has played some good football for the Houston Texans in his limited role. Number 2, I'm going to read off some numbers to you. 28, 35, 41, 30, 41, 35, 30, 35, 34. You want to know what that is? Points the Ravens have scored in their wins.
Yeah.
The Houston Texans cannot afford for this game to get away from them fast. They don't have the offense to keep up. Time and time again, we've seen and they've shown us to not be able to, was it 5 or 6 weeks in a row? No second half points, no second half touchdown. They cannot keep up with this offense. If this game gets out of hand early, then I think it'll be a blowout. Don't want to put a score prediction on it, but if Baltimore leaves out their first quarter and the game is 13-0, 14-0, or something along those lines, it's going to be a blowout. It's going to be an ugly Christmas day. Will not be a Christmas miracle. So they got to make sure that they're able to get off the field when they can get off the field. Not necessarily sure how good of a team Baltimore is on third downs right now, but whenever Houston can create that pressure or get them to play a little bit behind the sticks or on long downs to convert, get off the field. And lastly, I think this is for both teams, Kevin. Do not get caught up in Beyonce.
Hey, I'm with that. And if you heard what Lamar said on Monday, he said he's going to be watching. He said, sorry, John Harbaugh, I'm watching. I'm with you, though. I'm with you on that.
No, don't get caught up, man. But I mean, it's what I want to say.
Do you remember Evan McPherson at the halftime show with Cincinnati? He watched the halftime show from the field. The Bengals lost the Super Bowl, and he got all types of hate for it. Like,
don't get caught up in Beyonce. No, seriously. That's my 3 keys to victory. But Houston got to go out there and put it all together. I am worried about the secondary. I really am. And I'm really worried about Bateman having a big day for you guys. He's averaging 19, 18 yards per catch. Man. He's been the downfield target whenever Lamar needs to stretch the field. Houston has Derek Stingley, who I think they need to put on him, and Kalen Bullock, who I think right now should be in serious consideration for defensive rookie of the year. But I'm a little bit worried about Bateman because I don't think he's a Beyonce fan.
He's going to be locked in at halftime. No, Bateman's a stud. He's awesome. And to answer your question, Baltimore is 23rd in the league on defense and third down this year. So not a great number.
How are they offensive third
Offensively,
down?
They're third. They're good on third down.
So for the Texans defense,
right? Okay,
when they can get a shot to get off the field, do that. Because Baltimore, just like Kansas City, conversion. And you see a 10-play drive, and by the 8th play, the defense is a little worn out, and that's consistently. So by the third quarter, by the fourth quarter, those plays that this team has routinely been able to make. You got these offenses being able to control the clock and control the ball. Now they're gassed a little bit. And Lamar Jackson is the wrong quarterback to be gassed against.
Michael Penix's future is so bright, you got to wear shades.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast.
course, we got to talk about Michael Penix and the superior play that we got. And this has been obviously a big talking point these last couple of weeks with the potential switch to Michael Penix and why he was going to be so much better for this Falcons team and this offense than what we had been getting from Kirk Cousins this season. And you saw the Falcons kind of change their offensive game plan quite a bit from what we've seen in recent weeks with Kirk Cousins, with Michael Penix. You got more motion, according to Next Gen Stats. The Falcons ran 81% motion at the snap, which was their season high, which was 22% higher, than what they have run prior to that. They ran more play action this week. 20% of Michael Penix's dropbacks, had play action on them, and there were only 4 games during the first 15 games where Kirk hit 20% or higher. Those were weeks 2, weeks 3, week 6, and weeks 10. And, this game to me represented outstanding play calling from Zach Robinson. This is basically the offense that I wanted to see the Falcons run from the jump this year. And I think when you look at this game in isolation, it's exactly what you want to see from your play caller to help your rookie quarterback, be put in a position for success. My issue, however, is, when you apply the context of the previous week's 15 games, as well as especially focusing on those 5 most recent games with Kirk Cousins, I'm still wondering a little bit if the Falcons could have done a lot more of this type of stuff with Kirk Cousins. And the debate becomes, it's a couldn't versus a didn't. And I think the general narrative that I think will no doubt be sort of the overwhelming narrative was that Zach Robinson wasn't running some of these things that he ran against the Giants because Kirk couldn't run those things. And I tend to still believe that a lot of it is that Zach Robinson didn't run those things. And that's not to sit here and say that Michael Penix didn't show that he was more capable running a lot of those things than Kirk was, especially in recent weeks. He absolutely did. It's basically the idea that Kirk was doing some of these things at a C+ level, and you put Penix in and he's doing these things at a B+ level. Now, I don't know if the C+ is, to me, C+ is good enough that this is still stuff that you should be able to run with Kirk Cousins, but obviously it's not good enough for it to be sort of staple plays and whatnot, to make it, sort of the featured part of your offense. But it's still something that I think could be a regular part of your offense that you sprinkle in. And some of the examples that I'm talking about is like you saw a Yankee concept twice in this game, where you have that sort of the deep route and the deep sort of crosser over the middle of the field. And, there's a chance that they ran this without me making note of it. But the last time in my notes watching the film that I noted the Falcons running a Yankee concept was week 8, right? And it was that big catch to Chris Blair, and again, that shows with him being able to the zip and the touch and the accuracy and the placement on that football that Michael Penix showed on that particular play on that catch to Chris Blair in the second half. Those are sort of reasons why Penix is better at this stuff. But to me, it's not because Kirk couldn't run Yankee concepts, just Penix is better at it, right? You saw the split zone play action concepts, something that I thought and wrote about and talked about on this podcast, during the summer, that I thought was going to be kind of the staple run play of the Falcons and their staple play action concept off of that because of Kirk's athletic limitations, right? That you couldn't run the play action concepts, the bootleg concepts off of outside zone. And you would instead see the Falcons run a lot more split zone. And you saw the split zone play action run twice in this game. You also saw the Falcons run split zone as a run concept twice on their opening game script, something that they really haven't done really at all this season. And then you also saw like the touch pass to Ray McCloud in the third quarter. It's like those types of gadget plays were also things that I remember talking about during the summer of things that you could use for Ray McCloud consistently in the offense. First time the Falcons ran that, right? This season, that sort of touch pass. And for those of you not familiar, that's when Ray goes in motion and then Michael Penix takes a snap and just sort of taps the ball to him and he catches it and runs and whatnot. And so you didn't see that at all with Kirk in the offense. And you saw a lot more sort of shallow drags and shallow crossers in this sort of attacking the middle of the field, giving your young quarterback easy reads and easy throws to make. 5 out of the Falcons' 6 play action passes in this Giants game featured receivers running routes that were basically in breakers or running over the middle of the field. When you compare that to the Chargers game where they run like 6 7 play action concepts, and only 3 of those were, so basically were in breakers and whatnot. And so you're basically doubling the rate of sort of attacking the middle of the field play action concepts for Penix that you weren't necessarily doing for Kirk Cousins. And so, there were certainly plays in this game that I do think that Kirk couldn't run, like that one bootleg rollout that I don't think you could run that with Kirk. There was another play where Penix was able to escape a sack, roll off of a sack, and throw the ball away. Kirk is probably fumbling on that particular play. But outside of those 2 plays and maybe 1 or 2 others, I don't know how many plays I would look at this game, watching it, and say Kirk couldn't do those things. It was just more that Kirk didn't do those things. But, as I said at the top, and as I'm sure you've heard elsewhere and will continue to hear elsewhere, this offense does look better with Michael Penix. That was something that I underrated going into this game, thinking, okay, like other than the bootleg stuff, what is really going to be dramatically different? Yes, the physical tools and whatnot, but in terms of, down the field throws, all those various things, not sure that Penix is going to be demonstrably better, because like Kirk, I think is, an adjusted completion rate on deep passes this year is still top 10 quarterback in the league. But you did see those plays, right? You saw it a lot with sort of his connection with Darnell Mooney in this game, where you started to see more of those intermediate crossers, more of those deep outs and deep comebacks outside the numbers that were staple plays during Kirktober, right? When Kirk and this offense was cooking, that we saw consistently early and during the middle of the portion of the season that Mooney was consistently winning on. You haven't seen as many of those these last couple of weeks, and you saw those again, and that's a big part of why this offense was cooking. So again, Penix is much better on those throws than Kirk is at this point in time. And so again, to me, watching this film, showed me, in my humble opinion, and again, I think the narrative is going to be that like Kirk is 90 to 100% to blame for the offensive shortcomings over these last 5 games. And I would say Kirk is probably more to blame for like 60, maybe 70% of the shortcomings, which is still a significant percentage. But again, to me, the play calling, not dialing up some of these plays, to me was that 30% and whatnot. But at this point, it's water under the bridge. No use crying over spilt milk, at least after today. It is what it is, all the cliches, but it's basically, this is what the Falcons offense is going to be moving forward. This is exactly what I hoped this offense would be heading into the season. And it's kind of just better late than never, right? Again, another cliche when it comes to that. And so if that's what it is, then it is what it is. And we can take what we get. Beggars can't be choosers, all that stuff and more. So last little tidbit I'll say is, I'll be curious to see what Washington does from a defensive game plan against Penix. With the man coverage, that was something we talked about heading into the game, where you expected the Giants to play a decent amount of man coverage to try to force Penix to throw some tight window throws. They did. At times, Penix was able to win. At other times, he didn't quite win. And so I'll be curious if Washington dials that up to sort of basically force the Falcons rookie quarterback in a big sort of game to have to make some big boy throws and whatnot.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And you can make that wager on some crucial NFL games. The Cincinnati Bengals are not dead yet. They're favored by 3 points in a massive showdown against Denver on Saturday. The Falcons, who somehow hold tiebreakers and lead the NFC South, are 4-point underdogs at Washington on Sunday. Just 4 points at home against rookie quarterback. Something to think about in that one. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast.
All right, guys, as promised, we are lucky enough to be joined by the fantastic longtime host of the Locked On Spurs podcast, Jeff Garcia. Check him out on Twitter it's a legendary handle, Jeff G. Spurs Joan. Jeff, how's it going? Congratulations on having Victor Wembanyama in your life. You didn't have it good enough over the last 30 years. David Robinson, Tim Duncan, 5 championships. No, you just needed to get the next great generational player. I would be bitter, but things are going pretty well for the New York Knicks as well, so it's okay. The great news for you is not only do you have Wemby, but it feels like he's ascending to full-on super-powered alien ruler of the world status. last 10 games for him now, 27.5 points, 10 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 blocks, 48% from the field, shooting 39% from three, despite taking almost 10 of them a game, which is a lot more than Cat shoots, a lot more than Jalen Brunson shoots. He truly is a modern superstar. Oh, and he also has 29 blocks over his last 4 games. So that's where I wanted to start. I think the main area I'm focused on is how has he improved in a vacuum, and how has Chris Paul helped elevate his game? I saw a stat that they've connected on, like, Chris Paul's assisted Wemby for more threes than any player in the NBA has assisted another player for threes. What's new with him? How's he just wrecking the league at this point?
Yeah. Seriously, I to take a page out of my nerdiness, he's ascended to like Super Saiyan 3. I mean, seriously. He's
Jeff. That's the reference I wanted to make. I didn't know if my audience would get it, but thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Yeah. But I was asked by Locked On Celtics host John Corrales the other day, like, what's it like covering Wemby? And you know what? It's I get lost in the stats so much that I started having to focus in on just him as a person. Like, for example, he's still struggling with English. Like, every day, every game, he will look at us and be, oh, I never heard that word before. What is it? Like, he's so fixated on just learning more about the U.S. customs and everything. But as far as on the court, I mean, there are times, guys, I don't even know what to ask anymore on a post-game conference. I'm like, okay, I'm making this up. Okay, Wemby, you hit a quad double. What's new? Like, okay, sure. Yeah, not a problem. Okay, expected it.
I will say one thing you can ask about. When he was in Phoenix, he had like a 2,000-page Brandon Sanderson book with him. So maybe just asking about what he's reading. It seems like he's a big reader. I don't know. He's an interesting guy on top of just being an incredible player.
Yeah, he is. But, I think right now what we're seeing is just, him just evolving into what everybody projected him to be, that one-of-a-kind alien player. So you mentioned all those numbers right now, those stats, everything. We didn't even throw in that fastest of 200 3-pointers in a career over Steph Curry. That's just crazy. So, one, I like that he sticks to what he believes will work. So, for example, early in the season, a lot of criticism was thrown at him in the local media, among Spurs fans. You're taking too many threes, Wemby. You're taking too many threes. Stop it. You're 7'4". You should just be going in the paint. And he was asked about that, and he said, no, I'm just going to stick with it until I get it. And then he stuck with it, and now he's a threat. Why? Because he's always thinking about his competition. So during that period where he was chucking up threes and missing most of them, he was repeatedly asked, and one day he just said, yeah, because sometimes I'm going to have a big man joker, and I can beat him out on the perimeter than I can versus in the paint. Oh, I can do this to him. So he's always thinking about how he can attack his opposition, the opposing team. So that's just great. As far as other areas of his game that's improving, his facilitating is getting a lot better. He's constantly looking for his teammates, and I think that's great and refreshing from a superstar that he is. Any knocks? We did a Locked On Spurs the other day about Wemby's ascension, right? Mm-hmm. And we're saying, could he possibly already be entering like his peak years? Because how much further can this guy grow statistically? He's already averaging more than 20 points. His facilitating is great. He's hitting over like 57-58% shooting from within the 2-point line. Blocks. Well, I mean, I don't need to tell anybody about his blocking ability. I mean, it just leads the league in blocks. He recorded 10 blocks the other night. So where I could see him grow is one, cut off the turnovers. I get it. He's a superstar. A lot of the balls going to be touching his hand, so that's more turnover possibilities. But maybe cut back on some turnovers. But then I'm just nitpicking guys after that. I'm like, okay, well, he can get to the free throw line more. Okay, well, he's already taking like 8, 9, 10 attempts a game. So I think the next evolution for him is just becoming that Chris Paul kind of personality on the court for the team, if and when Chris Paul ever leaves San Antonio. Even if it's to retirement for Chris Paul, he's just gone. So I think that where you can see his next evolution, it becoming more his team. He's already saying the buzzwords of my teammates, my team, we didn't win or we won. But I would like to see him become more of a leader. He's going to be his own guy. He's not going to be Tim Duncan, who was a quiet leader. He's not going to be Chris Paul, the very loud vocal leader. I think he's going to be probably the type of leader that's just going to talk to the guys off to the side in the huddle, almost maybe out of Tim Duncan's page. I could see that coming on. for him. So I think that's the next evolution for him, because statistically, my goodness, guys, it jaw dropping. I seriously, I know you told me what we're going to talk about before we hit that record button, and when you told me, I was like, what can I say about a guy who just does it all? I mean, what more can I say? I really can't. As far as Chris Paul is concerned, yeah, the you're talking about the Wemby effect. How about the CP3 effect? They're just, first of all, I'm just, sometimes I'm just honored and sitting there talking to, I'm talking to Chris Paul right now. I mean, there's times I'm sitting there like, oh my God, it's Chris Paul, CP3.
Yeah.
But he is so, just a guy, that wants to win so badly. He apologizes every now and then that he hopes his teammates aren't mad at him for constantly yapping at them. He goes, I know they're mad at me. He goes, I know they're upset with me. When he broke the record for the assist thing, he told all his teammates, he goes, I know I'm a pain in the you-know-what. I get it. So, but that's how much he wants to win. And I think that was missing from the Spurs team since Wemby's come on. So last year, basically, they didn't have that type of presence in the locker room, presence on the court. So, and I understand that the assist thing to Wemby to CP3 are high. You rattled out the numbers here, but it's not just that. It's what he's doing for other guys on that court. It's what he's doing for Steph Castle, what he's doing for Trey Jones, what he's doing for the team collectively. I mean, he's having a renaissance, as close as you can get to it. He's not Lob City CP3. He's not, that New Orleans Hornet CP3. But my goodness, he's averaging close to a near double-double. Not bad for a guy who's 39 years old. So he looks like he hasn't missed a beat, even despite being 39 years old. I hope he sticks around for the entire season and doesn't get waived and latches on to a contending team. I don't think that will happen, but if this young team can just soak every single ounce of knowledge from this guy, if and when he does leave the Spurs, that would be great for this team. So, yeah, I mean, they're what?
Yeah, I was actually
they're hovering a little over 50, a little over 500 right now at 15-14 as we record. So, I mean, technically, look, the bar was set freaking low. 22 wins last year. I mean, how much more? If they won 30, oh yay, success. But I like that. I'm surprised with this team. Not just Wemby, not just CP3, but from Champagny to Vassell to Sohan. To interim coach Mitch Johnson. Yeah, technically a rookie head coach. Everybody's doing good.
Yeah, I was actually just saying to Gavin last night when I was looking at the FanDuel odds, I was like, the Knicks are favored by 9.5 points in this game, and I don't know if I totally agree with that. Like, I think that the Spurs team has shown a lot more this year, based just based off what I've seen of them, which is pretty little so far. Mostly just been keeping up with them from afar. But you touched on a lot of it. But I was going to ask about, like, what do you think has changed this year? What has this team gotten more comfortable with?
Right.
In terms of the scheme and everything else, because it's been sort of a weird year. Like I can see definitely the dividends of adding a Chris Paul, and then he hasn't come up yet, but like Harrison Barnes has been playing well for them as a veteran signing that they brought in to kind of bolster the team and give that veteran presence, which is always necessary when you're trying to like level up a team full of rookies and sophomores and junior players. But like, it seems like this roster is just really well balanced. Like, I certainly didn't think Stephon Castle was going to be quite as good as he's been so far. And the 3-point shooting still a little bit of a struggle for him so far, but he's been like a real impact player as a rookie. And I don't know that a lot of people saw that coming. Devin Vassell, is once he got back healthy, seems to be doing, what you would expect out of him now, being a solid extra scorer. In general, I just think up and down this roster, there's a lot of guys that can really, really play and, that complement a Wembanyama very well. Though you could argue that Wembanyama could fit on any roster in the league and, be totally fine because he's just that level of a talent. But how have things worked out like so far for the Spurs, in terms of adding that veteran talent, but then also, you mentioned they have a rookie head coach, and it's due to really bad circumstances where Greg Popovich has, been out for health reasons. And which could have created a sort of strain on the team and, created just a really tough situation for everybody. He's a universally beloved guy who's, obviously been with the organization for forever. And yet they seem to be making this work. And, as you said, are above 500, pushing towards last year's win total already, in December, which is impressive. And, all in all, I think looking a lot more cohesive than they did a year ago when things were a little more, up and down with all the young talent.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKED ON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
We hope Santa Claus is working overtime because we have our Christmas wish list.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Our Christmas wish list. Dear Santa, dear Chris, this year for Christmas, I'll give you the floor first. What would you like for Christmas?
I'm going to start with the most obvious thing, Warrior related. And that is,
you're going to take this a completely different route than I am. That's for sure.
I don't know. More than anything, I just want Steph and Draymond healthy.
Oh, yeah.
Give me good health in the new year for the Golden State Warriors. Because, look, there's a lot of ins and outs with this team. There's a lot of things that could happen. There's potential trades. There's other things I want, believe me. But none of it matters if Steph and Draymond aren't healthy in the new year. So let's just stay healthy. If it takes a game off here or there, fair enough. No big injuries for the big guys. That's my number one Christmas wish for the Warriors.
See, I'm going a little bit different than you. Mine is I want to get out the ghost of Christmas Past. Ooh. And I want him to visit Ebenezer Scrooge, and I want him to visit Steve Kerr, and I want him to visit Bob Myers, who's now on the set of ESPN, and I want him to visit all those guys. And I want the ghosts of Christmas Past to just change some things. Because, life's not bad for the Warriors right now. It could be a lot worse, right? You're somewhat in purgatory, but there are teams that are in hell. So it could be a lot worse out there than the Golden State Warriors. 20 teams would love 25, 23, whatever, would love to trade positions with you overall. But in terms of what this could have been, God, Kevin Durant, why did he have to go? And then forget just that. The draft picks that you had. The fact that you were set to be a championship contender, and sure you didn't know. Forget contender. The fact that you were set to win an NBA championship, and you had and I guess there was a years apart, right, without Clay, but you had the number 2 pick in the draft, and then you had lottery picks after that. There were so many things, and it's easy to have on the goggles. It's easy to put on the rose-colored glasses. Hindsight's always 20/20, right, Kolsky? But God, it is hard to bridge a gap. They tried to do it, did the Warriors with the timelines, the 2 timelines, and it hasn't worked out that way. But God, the only team in my lifetime that I feel like really bridged it, and you tell me if I'm wrong, were the San Antonio Spurs, where, they brought in a completely different core after Robinson and Bowen. They're gone. They bring in Manu, they bring in Parker, and then they almost got around 3 bridging gaps with Kawhi. It didn't get to that point, but they won a lot of games in the regular season. But that's what I go back to all the time, man. Warriors could have been in such amazing position if just one thing went a little bit differently. Still not the worst thing in the world, but my Christmas wish, Santa, take me back. 2019, 2018, how things could have changed.
Yeah, obviously the number one thing I think you'd do different is the Wiseman.
LaMelo Ball's averaging 37 and 5 right now. 30 points, 7 and 5.
Let me ask you something. Steve Kerr can't deal with how crazy Jonathan Kuminga is on the court. How do you think he'd handle LaMelo Ball? You think LaMelo Ball would be pulling up from 35 and still playing 35 minutes? Because I don't. I think LaMelo Ball should thank his lucky stars he didn't get drafted by the Golden State Warriors, because it wouldn't look like this. Now, the Warriors might have been in better position. It's probably still a better pick than Wiseman. But, I think looking at LaMelo, 5-6 years in, and saying, look at the stats, what if he was on the Warriors, is not – it wouldn't be like that.
It's more trading the pick, man. That's what I look back at. You're in position where you don't even need a young star to add to the mix. I mean, at the time you thought they did, right? I don't think many people thought the 21-22 team was going to win it. A Wiseman piece would have been huge if he panned out. But like looking back on it with the goggles on, it's so easy to say you cobble that pick together and you could have had a super team and things could look completely different. I mean,
I'm not sure you could have, it's easy to say, obviously, given what happened with Wiseman, trade the pick. I mean, what's the downside? Look, mistakes are going to be made in any sports franchise.
That was 5 years ago, though.
It was 5 years ago.
It was 5 years ago, and the Warriors are still running out the same core that they were in 21-22, a championship team, most of the same core.
Yeah, and I don't know who that would have been at the time. A lot of people on Twitter had ideas. I don't know that there were any great picks available or any great players available to acquire with that number 2 overall pick, because everybody knew it wasn't super. Like, it's not like James Wiseman was Victor Wembanyama. You know what I mean?
Or
like
Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah, that pick had value, obviously, but not crazy value. And I think the question going back that far is, would they have handled the Clay situation differently? And is there a better pick they could have made? Because I think LaMelo's interesting and obviously super talented. Tyrese Halliburton is the one that got away to me. And
that would have been a crazy pick, though, at number 2.
Well, but that's the thing. When I look back at stuff like this, I do my best to evaluate the process and not the results, right? Because James Wiseman was always a gamble, but he also looked like the best gamble given the Warriors roster and position at that time. In retrospect, they say, and even like it was suggested at the time, that they had Halliburton ranked number 2 in the draft class. And my position is, like, you got to have the strength of your convictions in those moments, right? Now, obviously, it seems crazy if you take Halliburton number 2 because of where he's mocked up and because of his apparent value at the time of the draft. But if you really believe that he's the second best player and you can't trade down to a place where you can get him, I think you've got to have the strength of your convictions and take that player at that point. And that, to me, is if indeed they had him rated that high, that's the mistake to me. Because I remember having the conversations. I remember talking to furious Warrior fans when they picked James Wiseman. And look, anyone who thought Wiseman was going to be a bust was right. So, I had higher hopes, and I was wrong on that one. But
you were just judging based off AAU and some Penny Hardaway ball. I mean, he played like 3 games at Memphis.
3 games. It was hard to know, right? I had higher hopes. It was hard to know. But I still remember people talking about trades that should be made with the number 2 pick, and most of them sounded to me the way the people sound now when they say trade Jonathan Kuminga for Giannis Antetokounmpo, which is to say it's imaginary. It was never a possibility. It was never realistic. So could you have traded number 2? Yeah. Would it have gotten you a star that would have you in a very different position right now? I'm not so sure. So, you're right. That revisionist history is fascinating, and there are 1,000 ways it could have gone, whether it's LaMelo, Halliburton, a trade. But yeah, that's the key mistake of the 2 timeline attempts, is drafting James Wiseman.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And you can make that wager on some crucial NFL games. The Cincinnati Bengals are not dead yet. They're favored by 3 points in a massive showdown against Denver on Saturday. The Falcons, who somehow hold tiebreakers and lead the NFC South, are 4-point underdogs at Washington on Sunday. Just 4 points at home against rookie quarterback. Something to think about in that one. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
The gift giver to Mavs fans, I think all over, is Nico Harrison, because this Mavericks team a couple of years ago was just churning, and it felt like the Luka experiment was, or the Luka era, and the way to play around Luka, and they tried with Kristaps Porzingis with the previous regime and all that. You got to a point where it was in the playoffs, and all of a sudden Tim Hardaway Jr. was your second best player, and you look around and go, what is happening? How did it come to this? And the Mavericks needed an influx of talent. They needed a bunch of guys. They needed guys around Luka. They needed a second star that was going to stay on the court, that was going to be helpful for Luka, that was going to be mature around Luka, that was going to be a second star, like an actual star, an actual all-star, that had experience, that had been there before. They needed all those things. They needed size. They needed rim protection. They needed defenders. They needed shooters. They needed creators. It was like, you look around and you're like, oh my gosh, Luka is lifting this team that has no business being in some of these games or having the record that they did. And it's not like they had no talent, not to disparage all the players that were on there, but for Luka to be an MVP caliber player and to get to the place that he needed to be, and this team needed to be building around him, they needed an influx of talent. Everyone can see that. And the Mavericks make a big change. Mark Cuban makes the change. Donnie Nelson and that regime out. Nico Harrison's regime in. Jason Kidd in with him as well. But I want to start with Nico Harrison because it's a gift for Mavs fans to have a GM that barely misses. A gift. I'm going through them all. I went through his page. You can go to Basketball Reference and look up Nico Harrison and then just look at all the moves he's made, literally in line, like just every single one of them. And I started to go through. I'm like, all right, what's a miss and what's a hit? And I was trying to be really objective about it. What's a hit and what's a miss? Let's go through the hits first. Those are more fun. The Kyrie trade, massive hit. Gave up 1 first-round pick. Dinwiddie, he's already back for free. Dorian Finney-Smith. That's it. That's all you gave up for Kyrie Irving. He's going to be an all-star this year. Yeah. Great. Huge hit. He took a risk there. We've talked about that. We've gone over that forever. And it paid off in an incredible way because Nico Harrison had the relationship with him. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's worked out as well as it has. Kyrie trade, huge hit. Derek Lively pick. Took a terrible situation. The team was bad. They kept their pick and they got Derek Lively. Made a trade in the draft like the Mavs do. They only acquire their best players through trades in the draft. They never just straight up draft them. Dirk, Luka, Derek Lively. They never just draft them. Brunson, I guess, was an actual draft pick. Derek Lively, huge hit. Took a risk on him. In the draft process, a lot of draft people had Derek Lively at 25 or 24. And then he slowly started rising up a little bit. And then even where he got taken was a little bit of a reach to some people. He was a one-year player at Duke who hadn't played that much, who didn't have outstanding numbers, who had dealt with injuries. And Nico Harrison took that risk in a way. They needed to hit on that pick. They needed to. If they missed on that pick, it would have been detrimental. You look at some of these other teams that have missed on big picks. Look at the Warriors right now. Kuminga's been pretty good, but Moody, James Wiseman was a massive miss for them, and that was number 2 pick. And look at them. They could be in a completely different spot than they are right now. So Lively pick, great hit. The PJ Washington trade, the Daniel Gafford trade, last trade deadline, huge hit. Like you just can't deny that anymore. I was listening to Locked On Suns recently, and our friends Brendan and Ben Garcia over there were talking about what the Suns need. And Brendan laid out this whole thing. He's like, this Suns team, they need blah, blah, blah. He starts going through. We have all these different kinds of rosters. They need a versatile defending wing that can do a lot of things. And they need another center and a big with size. Oh, the same trades the Mavs just made. What a gift That the Mavs are not on that side of it. That they went star hunting like they did in the past all the time. Tried to get 3 stars together. Tried to save cap room, dry powder, all that. Instead, Nico Harrison just went out and made the move the Mavs need. The risk paid off with Kyrie, so they had 2 stars already. He inherited Luka, which is obviously a gift to him, but then he got the role players around him. This past offseason, the Klay Thompson trade, I think was a hit so far. You give up Josh Green, and I don't know, like I'd rather have Klay Thompson for what he can bring because he's made the Mavs offense elite when he's on the court, and there's still more to unlock there. So maybe that's not finished yet, but I'll count that as a win. The Tim Hardaway Jr. dump for Grimes. We'll get to Tim Hardaway a little bit later, but the fact that he could dump Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract and get Quentin Grimes back, that's a win. That's a hit to me. Go all the way back to the Kristaps Porzingis trade. He traded him for Dinwiddie, and like talent-wise, in a vacuum and all that, you look at it and say, that's not a really good trade. Kristaps Porzingis for Davis Bertans and Spencer Dinwiddie, that's probably not a good trade. But the Mavs went to the Western Conference Finals. It's undeniable they played much better after that. So that's a hit to me. It made the team better. That's what these trades are for. Just because the talent level isn't the same or isn't equal, it's not an NBA 2K trade, the team got better. Let's go to some signings. Reggie Bullock, the signing in 2021. Huge hit. Great. Signed and brought him in. Derek Jones Jr., another one. Huge hit. Brought him in for the minimum. That was massive. Dante Exum last year. Brought him back from Europe. That was a big hit to me. Najee Marshall this season. Like, he just keeps hitting on these wings over and over again just in free agency. And then I'll count Jaden Hardy as a hit. 2nd-round pick, and he can play in the NBA. There's a lot of 1st-round picks and 2nd-round picks that can't play in the NBA. Jaden Hardy can at least play in the NBA. He's had good games. He has NBA skills. Now, is he going to be a for sure rotation player on a championship team? That's a high ask, right? But at least he can play in the NBA. That's a hit. 2nd-round pick. And that was Nico Harrison's 1st draft pick that he made. So hits, like that's so many hits I just went over, and it's been 3 years. The misses, the big one to me, I think the worst miss was the JaVale McGee signing, because you had to stretch and waive him to get off that contract. That was a big miss to me. Now, did Jason Kidd want to bring JaVale McGee in? And my dog is disagreeing with that take. Did Jason Kidd want to bring in JaVale? And is that the reason why they brought him in and all that? Yeah, maybe there's some of that, but let's just call it for what it is. It was a miss. They had to stretch and wave him, so they admitted that it was a miss. The Christian Wood trade, okay, kind of a miss, but what did you really lose there? Like, you brought him in, he gave you some good minutes. Averaged 16 points for the Mavs. They end up moving on from him, but they lost a 1st-round pick. So you're like, okay, well, they lost that, but that pick turned into Wendell Moore. Who? That right? Okay, so that's kind of a miss, maybe. I don't even know if I count that a miss, actually, now talking through it. The Grant Williams trade. They traded for Grant Williams. They gave up a 2030 pick swap. That's kind of a big deal. But they flipped Grant Williams for PJ Washington. So turned a miss and a player into PJ. The extension for Tim Hardaway Jr. going all the way back. Was that a miss? At least you kept the asset. You were able to flip him into Grimes. And then the Omax trade. Traded for Omax to get in the 1st round in the Derek Lively draft. Is that a miss yet? I don't know. It's like another still like incomplete. The Klay Thompson one and the Omax one are still kind of incomplete. And you also got Rashawn Holmes in that deal for Omax. And you flipped him for Gafford. So that might be a hit right there. So even in his misses, he moves on quick when he does miss. And so to me, that's a gift. A GM that will barely miss, but when he does miss, he adjusts. JaVale McGee didn't work. All right, stretch and wave. Let's just move on. Christian Wood trade. All right, 1 year, didn't really work. Let's move on from him. Let's not sign him to a long deal and like continue this on longer than it needs to. Grant Williams. All right, didn't work. Let's trade him and flip him for PJ Washington, who has been incredibly important to this Mavericks team. Tim Hardaway Jr. All right, we extended him. Let's flip him and move this contract and bring in somebody younger and better in lots of ways. Rashawn Holmes brought him in and took on his contract. Let's flip him for Gafford. Let's use that contract that we got and flip him for something better. Barely misses, moves on quick when he does. Nico Harrison has been a gift and has given a gift to the Dallas Mavericks and to Dallas Mavericks fans